Story 1. Personally, I think any form of I am going to construct an in-group and harm people outside of it is intrinsically bad, and I believe that is the general consensus worldwide. The reason misandry is often treated as not a big deal is because of the people advocating it. Misogyny is propagated by individuals in major positions of power. The systems enforcing it are centuries old and deeply embedded in society. A person actively advocating for misandry as a good thing, like someone on a dating app, is typically so unequipped to amass power for their beliefs that it is seen as low risk. This is unfortunate because there are systems that harm most men to benefit a select few. These systems of misandry are embedded within patriarchy. Examples include treating men's work as their only real source of validation as human beings, or creating fear of poor, black, immigrant, mentally ill, or queer men as intrinsic threats to women and children. These are forms of misandry. Story 2. The reason is similar to why you can say cracker, but not the N-word. It is due to a history of oppression. It is unfortunate and unfair, but that is the reason. This is not a statement about right or wrong. Story 3. Misogyny historically has had more stopping power. Career advancement, money, and general security have always been more favorable for men. Misandry is seen as pushing back on power, whereas misogyny is seen as an abuse of power. There are exceptions, and people often point them out. However, statistics do not lie. Married men with families have historically out-earned married women with families. Even though the title of this Pew Research Center article seems to indicate the opposite in the current day, the data shows that men are still the primary breadwinners the majority of the time, and women who earn the same still maintain most of the household responsibilities. Story 4. Misogyny and misandry are both harmful. We should not accept either. Both cause real harm, and anyone who tries to downplay or justify them is not a good person. Story 5. The usual answer is that misogyny is institutionally powered and misandry is just unorganized opinion. There are more obnoxious ones like because one's deserved, but I am only noting that for completeness' sake. Personally, I agree with the premise that they are two different scales of things, but I part company when people start implying that it makes blanket misandry okay. They are two different things and neither is okay. Story 6. To a certain extent, it feels like it is seen as very binary. You cannot have misandry if you have misogyny. Misogyny is an important issue, but misandry is not. Misogyny means women have real problems. In reality, like most things, it is shades of gray. The issue is that when society tries to make nuanced things black and white, it creates resentment. Society is complex, and gender is far from the only issue that people struggle with. No one wants their issues dismissed as unimportant because they are not. Issues need to be acknowledged independent of who experiences them, although identifying the right issue is not always simple. Society seems to see things through the lens of winning and losing. For some people, that is a good thing. I would suggest that if possible, ignore them and try to make sure everyone else wins. If the only issue holding back progress is resentment, then remove resentment. Being in a victimized community can be tough, and I appreciate that, but I am not sure in what context openly claiming to be a bigot could be sensible to admit other than among other bigots. As an inside joke, or even just a joke in general or seriously, gender tensions are high. That means it is more important than it has been for a while to stand up for your rights, but also bring people together or not be unnecessarily divisive. Yes, some men deserve to be called out, but if you tar all men with the same brush, it feels like a kick in the teeth if you also have disdain for those kinds of men. Careless language has consequences. Language is very nuanced. You cannot assume two people will read the same thing the same way. Story 7. This is pretty easy for me. In theory, as a principle, hate on the basis of gender should not be acceptable at all, regardless of whether it is directed at men or women. In practice, misogyny has had an extremely disproportionate real-world impact, while misandry has not. Like, full stop. So, I am fine with people tending to care more about misogyny than misandry. Neither is good, but in terms of actual impact, it is like having a pimple versus having rabies. One tends to be a minor irritation, and the other takes over control of your body and kills you. Also, I think it is in very bad taste to post that on your dating profile as a joke or not. I would suggest not trying to match with that person, and I would feel kind of bad for the guy that does. Story 8. People who hate men are held to the same standards. We call them losers, just like how people who hate women are losers. Let them be and live in their complaining worlds. Story 9. You are not giving it a pass and you are posting it here. That person did not get by without being called out. You are doing it right now. Women get called out for it all the time. Both misogyny and misandry continue to be rampant online. Do not make the mistake of thinking the internet reflects how people relate to one another in reality. Story 10. Because everyone behaves as if everything is a zero-sum proposition, misandry is tolerated where misogyny is not, because men have traditionally held power in society. Even if you accept the proposition that we have overcorrected in some way when it comes to misandry and misogyny, we are still much closer to being even than we were 10 years ago. When balancing what is falsely viewed as competing interests, there will be an ebb and flow because we are not perfect. Story 11. You want an honest take from men, so here is my honest take. It is because women simply do not have the power and ability to terrorize men the way that men have terrorized women throughout history, up to and including today. I will never have a low-grade fear of women the way that most women have a low-grade fear of men. That is the privilege of being male. Story 12. Misogyny has a higher rate of leading to femicide and physical violence against women. If you were walking alone in a park at midnight and a woman was walking behind you, you would think nothing of it. Now reverse the scenario, and she probably has her hand on a self-defense device in her purse, ready for fight or flight to kick in. People claiming male suicides are the same as femicide need to go outside and engage with reality. You cannot draw that correlation when there are many factors contributing to male suicides. That said, misandry is still wrong, but it is not equal to misogyny on any level. Story 13. I think at the end of the day, all you can do is clarify your values and boundaries and stay away from people who do not align with them. Do I think it is a double standard? Yes. But at the same time, what I can do about it is really only staying true to myself and my beliefs. In the current climate, calling this out will get ridiculed or, worse, result in a setback of what you are trying to change. Unfortunately, you are going to have to pick your battles. Story 14. Honestly, men do not speak up enough and do not support other men when dealing with this issue. Unfortunately, men are more likely to engage in hatred toward men than to speak up against it. Story 15. I think this one is pretty simple, actually. To whatever degree you believe it is true, the common belief is that women have been oppressed for centuries and men have had all the power, control, wealth, freedom, and fun. So after only several decades of that starting to change, people still have very little patience for men who are now claiming sexism against them, especially when men still hold the majority of power and wealth. Story 16. Women are seen as less of a threat, which is an ironic, society-wide sexist bias that leads to women receiving less implicit respect. As a result, girls get away with more aggression because it is seen as less dangerous. For instance, certain female incel communities have female attackers as a symbol. When men display aggression, the threat is taken more seriously, which is understandable since men statistically pose a greater threat. Story 17. I once encountered someone who aggregated women's dating profiles, replaced the relevant wording to create a man's profile that reflected the average but was otherwise taken word for word from women's profiles, and posted it. He immediately got attacked and mocked by women across the spectrum, who called him a bigot, misogynist, monster, and more, with most saying he should have fun dying alone. Mirrors can be an unpleasant thing for the shallow. Story 18. No, he would not be banned because I have seen this when I did online dating. But no woman would go on a date with him, and I assume no man would want a date with this woman. I think men overestimate the amount of censure they actually experience versus what they expect. While yes, there are a lot of reports filed, there is rarely a conclusion or consequence as a result of those reports. Instagram will not take it down, for example, because it promotes engagement on their platform. Dating applications really do not care because they want more users, and self-identified creeps are easy to avoid and do not create much liability for the company. I am not sure which one is worse, so much as no one cares about either as long as it brings in revenue. Story 19, because it is punching up. Criticizing those who, in general, hold the power is always more socially acceptable. Punching down is similar to bullying and social repression, so it is understandably looked down upon. Story 20. It is unfortunate that men are often dismissive of men's issues, especially during Men's Mental Health Month. I frequently see women dislike this community because men support each other and their issues, but that is not the case. Story 21. I find a lot of the misandry talk online unreasonable or mean, but I am not under real threat from it, so I have stopped engaging with those people. Story 22. People in the comments acting like hatred toward men does not or cannot harm men are exactly the reason why this behavior keeps happening. Both hatred toward men and hatred toward women are horrible, inexcusable, and can harm people. This is very disappointing and further proof of why men do not speak up because people, especially women, do not care or think it is an issue. The reason why women get away with this behavior is that they know nobody takes it seriously, so they do not get held accountable. When a man is abused, he is called weak and told it is just not a real issue. The exact reason why you do not hear about it is that men know nobody cares, and if they come forward, they will just be brushed aside and insulted. I am disappointed in this community for not taking men's issues seriously when it is usually supportive of each other. If men do not take men's issues seriously, then why would women? Story 23. It is by a large portion of society. You found it on Reddit, a platform dedicated to various communities, and you posted it here for agreement. Remember, Reddit often reflects a liberal perspective. The main difference, in my opinion, is that many men have no standards and will pursue a woman like that with no issue. That is likely what she wants anyway. Men with no self-worth who will treat her like a princess no matter how badly she treats them. If you want things to change, the best way would be to take a cue from the Korean 4B movement. Stop being involved with these women until they stop treating men poorly. Story 24. Because women do not hold the same amount of power as men, generally misandry only results in individual bigotry. Misogyny, however, has far-reaching negative effects on women as an entire population, including pay gaps, hiring practices, and sexual assault, in addition to individual bigotry. The harm caused by misogyny is not comparable to that caused by misandry. Story 25. If I were to guess, it's because there are no laws about men's health, voting access, or rights in general being put under consideration, and there never have been. I think it's safe to say that when one sex is widely threatened and the other is not, it's a bit silly to talk about equality and how unfair misandry is. As someone said, men are afraid women will laugh at them. Women are afraid men will rape or murder them. Honestly, while I don't approve of misandry, I'm surprised it's not more common. Almost every single woman is sexualized by adult men when they are still children. Most women you know have been groped, harassed, or assaulted more than once before adulthood. And in an election, around a third of the country's men heard a candidate talk about getting away with sexual assault and still voted for him. You shouldn't be asking why misandry is acceptable. Instead, you should ask why it is not even more common. They are safer as misandrists than as egalitarians. That is just an objective fact of reality. It is hard to argue it is wrong when the people you want to argue with have to use many different strategies to avoid getting raped during their daily routines. It's like imagining living in the 1950s segregation era and asking why black racism against white people is acceptable, but white racism against black people is wrong. It is not that racism is ever good. But given the social, legal, and cultural conditions of the time, it is a foolish question. Fix the real problems first, then maybe address the resentment of the oppressed. Story 26. On average, we are bigger, stronger, faster, and in positions of power in the workplace. The damage we can do is far easier to accomplish. Story 27. Power dynamics. People in positions of power are generally men. This is true even in female-dominated fields. Women make up the majority of teachers, but principals are close to a 50-50 split, and superintendents are mostly men by a large margin. Story 28. Women tend to be better at, for lack of a better word, unionizing than men. If a man starts conflict with a misandrist, he has conflict with her friends and their boyfriends or supporters. If a woman calls out a misogynist, most of society will go against him. There is also the cultural background where, for most of history, gender roles put men above women, with the assumed responsibility of protection and provision that went along with that. Cultural expectations have not yet caught up with the rights women have won in the past 100 years. Story 29. Put in exaggerated terms. Hatred of men leads to the hurt feelings of men. Hatred of women leads to women getting killed. Story 30. So I originally posted this in Nice Girls. It's because you're posting there. The algorithm will push more outrage content towards you to generate clicks, and you'll start to turn into one of those types of people who see oppression everywhere in everyday real life. A cliché, but in real life most people will be polite to your face and keep their more outlandish opinions to themselves. Ethical non-monogamy, partnered, dating separately, Pisces, Sagittarius, Leo, one cat mom, misandrist, big beautiful woman, dating unintentionally, Myers-Briggs type indicator and astrology, laugh out loud. I'm sure their comments on men will be well thought out. Story 31. Not enough men care about misandry. Feminism is a significant movement because women developed it. Most of the time, especially online, discussing misandry is often used as an argument against feminism, even though we should share the same goal. We do not care about each other. Story 32. I guess because it is not as pervasive in society, nor does it have as long a history. But give it time. Eventually, the world will see it is just as bad as misogyny, as women already are. Story 33. If we excuse hate from one side because of history, aren't we just playing moral relativism with human dignity? I agree. I find misandry repugnant. However, misandry is not as severe or as common as misogyny. Even if it is less rampant in society, it is still a problem. All people deserve basic respect until they prove unworthy, and all people deserve dignity. Seeing a profile that says misandrist means I swipe left. Story 34. I don't agree with your characterization. Lots of misogyny goes unchallenged and unpunished every day. Your example is one woman putting something in her dating bio versus a hypothetical man who did the same thing. If you're going to argue with a comparison, don't make half of it up. As for the underlying issue, I think misogyny is much more dangerous than misandry. If all the men on Earth fought all the women on Earth, the men would win easily. Women have to live with that baseline unsafety and vulnerability every day. So if someone wants to put that in their profile, that's my cue to swipe left and move on. It's not cause for a sociocultural crusade. All her misandry did was give me useful information that prompted me to avoid her. I'm glad she is honest about it. Story 35. Because misandry does not have nearly as long a history of abuse. Misogyny has existed for nearly all of human history, while misandry has been more of an on and off phenomenon. It is also about power dynamics. Men still hold vastly more power than women in day-to-day life. Therefore, misogyny is seen as a genuine threat, while misandry is seen as benign. Story 36. Men are not seen as a protected class unless you consider race. Society deems it acceptable to punch up or punch at the same level. It is not acceptable to punch down. Story 37. Do not let the naysayers get you down. Acceptable misandry is a form of cultural contempt. Contempt makes empathy and trust impossible. It is a significant problem. Misogyny has historically had more room to be expressed. In fact, one can argue that the current moment of popular culture consensus around contempt for men is mostly a reaction to misogyny and male privilege. Even in the face of that contempt, it is the duty of every man to disavow patriarchy because it is a form of oppression. However, misandry remains a serious problem. Story 38. When we correct a situation of inequality, we are not going to be consistent or precise all the time. It stands to reason that we will initially go to the other extreme, but over time, things will balance out. At least, that tends to be the case. Story 39. Most of these people do not view misandry as harmful. While it is true that throughout history misogyny has led to the subjugation of women, it is a myth that misandry is harmless. Misandry only serves to increase misogyny and lack of sympathy among men. It corrodes any goodwill that has been established over the years and definitely has a negative societal impact. However, you can boil this down very simply. Hate is hate and it is all ugly. There is no equity or value in it. Story 40. There is a saying that goes, misandry annoys, misogyny kills. The day a feminist woman causes a mass casualty event is the day we can say misandry kills and hold those responsible to task. Story 41. You're saying, oh my God, imagine if men did that. But they literally do as well. They use coded language, for example, must be led, take direction, etc. And it is not being written in a kind way either. Also, you are being obtuse to ignore the structural differences between women and men in society. Story 42. Because it does not have any structural power, it has social significance. But there are no truly powerful groups or organizations for whom hatred of men is an animating purpose. Story 43. It is treated differently because it is different. Misandry is real and very impactful, but misogyny is more pervasive and detrimental in more ways, more often. It is truly unfortunate to proudly identify as a misandrist, but proudly being a misogynist would be worse. I know that is tough to accept for some. I used to be a men's rights supporter, but thankfully I knew many women and decided to listen. The challenges they face daily are far more intense and far more common. They do not have to imagine how something could happen. They all know people to whom it has actually happened. Story 44. Because men do not have the same solidarity as women. One man's trash is another man's treasure, but one woman's trash is every woman's trash. Men often see other men as competition and may betray them to gain attention from women, whereas women discourage that kind of behavior and stop it early. As men, we need to build a strong brotherhood like women have to counteract misandry and avoid dating women who openly dislike men. However, this will be difficult because men often act impulsively regarding women, and many are craving attention, allowing provocative statements like, "You are not a real man," to affect their fragile sense of masculinity. Story 45. I am going to go against the grain and say it is because women generally do not take misandry to the extreme. Some women may make generalizations about men based on a few bad experiences. However, unless a woman is truly malicious, she is unlikely to start abusing men just because she does not like them. It is more like passive snarky comments, rudeness, nagging, and generally having a negative attitude toward men. It is usually less violent. However, it is still unpleasant to be on the receiving end of such behavior, and unfortunately, there are few places to discuss misandry openly. Story 46. Because misandry is not systemic or rooted in our culture, men still hold a majority of power and wealth. Most misandry occurs on social media and is a response to misogyny from other men, stemming from patriarchal gender roles which also hurt men. I believe misandry comes from the position of the oppressed as mistrust and hatred, albeit misguided and generalized, toward men as a whole. It is often reinforced by multiple negative experiences with the opposite gender. Meanwhile, misogyny often comes from the position of the privileged oppressor, where men are raised to feel superior and in control of women. Story 47. I would not say misandry is insignificant, but for the most part, I agree that misandry hurts feelings while misogyny is actually dangerous. Both are forms of discrimination, but they have vastly different outcomes. Additionally, if I am being honest, men in my life have been bigger misandrists than any woman I have met. Story 48. I don't know. Does it affect you in any way? What are you worried about here? Women can list millions of big and small ways that misogyny in men affects them. Many men hate women, and we see society shaped around that. I have yet to see women either have the power or the desire to shape society around misandry. The closest I have seen is the anti-trans movement, which seems to have a misandrist element. At the end of the day, it is a free country. You can hate who you like unless you are suggesting we have thought police. The issue with misogyny is not that many men hate women, but that they act in ways that negatively affect women. Until women as a group have the power and will to do that to men, I would not worry so much. Story 49. The extreme normalization of hostility toward men is the entire reason highly toxic influencers like Andrew Tate receive such a large following. It is the reason why I distance myself from critics of Tate, despite not being a fan of Tate myself. If you do not understand why he is famous, then chances are you are the reason he is famous. Story 50. Society does not take misandry seriously because of the historical power imbalance between men and women. That balance is shifting. More women are starting to attend university than men. A little story. I have 3 sons, and when my eldest, now 16, was little, he liked to watch Disney Junior. They had a short break every hour saying it was nap time. During it, they would say to the girls that they can be anything they want to be: doctors, scientists, politicians, etc. My husband and I did not really pay attention to these breaks until one day he said to us, "It must be nice to be a girl. They can be anything they want to be when they grow up." I know what Disney was doing was not about hate, but it made my son feel awful. They could have easily made it about all children, not just girls. So, my point is that to some people, misandry might seem harmless or unable to do harm. Who knows what the world will look like in 50 or 100 years? Fighting hatred with hatred will never work. Just my opinion. Story 51. Because hating men is socially acceptable, you even get extra points if you come up with a new reason to hate men. Story 52. A lot of good reasons have been outlined by others already, along with some bad ones. In short, men are seen as more disposable than women. While many of us as individuals care, as a society we do not. Far too many people, especially women, see it as a zero-sum game. They often tell men that feminism does not take away their rights but will oppose anything that may benefit men for fear of negative repercussions for women, such as father's rights. We do not hold women to the same standards we hold men. We do not hold women accountable for their actions in the same way we hold men. It is a multitude of factors. Story 53. How is this even a question? Misogyny leads to femicide and affects women's quality of health care, with misogynistic doctors dismissing issues related to women's health and access to reliable birth control. Misogyny also contributes to the wage gap and the pink tax. What has misandry done? It hurts men's feelings on social media? How is that even remotely comparable? Certainly, women should not say mean things online, but I have yet to see a murder case caused by misandry. In contrast, there have already been 4 femicide cases in my city in the past few weeks. Story 54. It's a certain type of woman that endorses it. Sit back and you will see exactly what I mean. Actions speak louder than words. Everyone is inexperienced when they are young and will let women push them around. When they get a little older, the same subset of people would say it is a joke or try to play it off. It is well known that there is a double standard. Story 55. Maybe the fact that women as a whole do not hold societal power over men as a whole might have something to do with it. Story 56. They are just so caught up in their own bubble, they genuinely believe men have it easy and nothing to worry about. I knew a woman like that. After a few conversations and her experiencing that women are not perfect in her failed lesbian relationship, she changed her view. They seriously think men face zero hardships and that we are exaggerating. They do not believe us. Now, the thing is, a woman calling herself misandrist on a dating app will make her even more deluded, as putting that in her bio is a magnet for bad-intentioned men. Men who swipe on her will probably be angry that she does not see or acknowledge our problems and may be rude, or pretend to be nice at first and then dump her as even bigger payback. Then the misandrist will say, "See, I told you men are bad." That is how the cycle of hate continues. The conflict between men and women is childish and does not help anyone. Story 57. Because even for men, hatred of women causes the most actual harm. The reason men have such terrible physical, emotional, and mental health is that we are trained to associate those traits with being girly, which is considered bad. Hatred of men, by contrast, is mostly just internet trolls saying mean things. I have never been actually harmed by someone who hates men. Story 58. Are women the biggest threat to men's lives? Are multiple men killed every week by their wives and girlfriends? Are men less likely to succeed at work, be demonized for what they wear, if they work or if they stay at home, and treated as inferior in every sphere of their lives. When women hate men, they want to get away from them. When men hate women, they kill us. And worse. Story 59. Because men have largely been silent about their abuse out of a misplaced sense of duty toward people who do not appreciate them. Story 60. Probably because of biology. Having your testosterone levels in a good range often makes you confident in many situations. Now, pair that with the male body. Men can easily overpower the average woman with brute strength. Considering external factors like environment and history, I am not surprised and would just accept it. Story 61. Because the expectations that we hold for women are extremely lenient to the point that we often give them passes, whereas if a man did the same, he would be in trouble. Story 62. Because women mass murdering men for being men is much rarer than the reverse. If it even happens, I cannot think of examples. There is no Ellie Rogers. Story 63. Misandry comes from deep-seated issues that women have with men, and men need to change that. Any woman you ask has had at least one experience where she was verbally or physically assaulted by a man. Women are currently dying just because they are women, and now they are sick of it. Finally, they are standing up and are willing to call out men who pretend to be good guys or men who claim to care about issues but do not actually want to help. Women are not taking it lying down anymore, and that comes off as misandry. Do some women take misandry too far? Of course, but so do men with misogyny. Both are very damaging, but one is rooted in fear and the other is rooted in hate. Not only that, but men do not help each other emotionally. I have male coworkers who open up to me about mental health issues, and of course I try to help them and talk to them. But then when I tell my other coworkers about it, they respond with, "Never talk to a girl about your emotions. She will think you are weak, and that is a turn-off. Who told you that? Why shouldn't you talk to me? And why does it matter if it is a girl you talk to about it?" Men have struggled to care about their mental health because of the image society has given them. Those who constantly hold men to the standards of "don't show emotions. Therapy is for weak people," and "men don't cry," are why we will never get rid of misandry. Women do it, yes, but men are also very guilty of misandry. They just do not know it. Story 64. There are a couple of important points to consider here, and I hope people pay attention to the nuance. We are not aiming for equality. That was the old model, and it turned out that it does not work. We are aiming for equity, which is similar but crucially different. Equality can be described as equal treatment. That sounds good and reasonable, right? Everyone plays by the same rules, so everything is fair. Except it is not. You can apply the rules equally to two different people and get very different results because the context in which those rules are applied is vastly different. People have different backgrounds, different issues, and a massive amount of history that can ensure that even the most rigid and equal application of laws and societal norms results in some people ending up worse off. Those people tend to be the ones who have been historically oppressed. Or, as a French judge may or may not have said, "The majesty of the law is such that the rich and the poor would be equally punished for sleeping under a bridge." Women, because of all that history, are nearly infinitely more harmed by misogyny than men are by misandry. When we accept misogyny, women end up in hospitals and morgues. When we accept misandry, men end up with hurt feelings. Punishing two superficially similar actions identically, when they have such different impacts and outcomes, is not just. Equity, on the other hand, uses multiple sets of rules to balance out disadvantages that have accrued to some groups so they can participate on a level playing field. It is more just than equality because it looks at outcomes rather than processes. If we apply this rule, will one group always reap most of the benefits? Are there any rich people who sleep under bridges? Or is this equal rule really a way to criminalize poverty? Does a woman making a joke about misandry, no matter how bad taste it may be, actually hurt men anywhere near as much as a man making a similar joke about misogyny? By the way, that happens all the time without any terrible consequences. Being canceled is over. No one cares anymore. What we want is equity, at least until equal application of rules starts to result in equal outcomes, and then we can move to equality. On top of that, some say that it is more tolerated when a woman does something, and if a man did the same, he would be called out and screenshot and so on. But that happened to this woman, too. She was called out and her post was screenshot, exactly as would happen to a man. So where exactly is the double standard? The result of that joke was exactly the same as if a man had made it. Story 65. Misandry is normalized, endemic, and therefore harder to identify and challenge. When a society is gynocentric, it naturally discriminates against the other, in this case, men. There is the ironic fact that women are often seen to have less agency than men. Young boys molested at school by a female teacher are dismissed as lucky lads, while young girls molested by a male teacher are condemned with statements like, "He should die." Double standards exist everywhere, from birth to legal outcomes, to death and suicide rates. Men are raised to be the disposable gender while also being told they are what is wrong with the world. They are portrayed as killers, criminals, bad or absentee parents, and more. When such terrible perceptions are normalized in a society, it is difficult to know where to begin. Story 66. Misandry has only affected your life as much as you have allowed negative content online to affect you. Misogyny results in individuals like Elliot Rodger. Story 67. Misandry makes men cry. Misogyny kills women. That is the difference. Women are just trying to survive and feel safe. Story 68. It is because fundamentally punching up in comedy is acceptable and punching down is not. Making a joke about rich old white men is acceptable. They have power. Making the equivalent joke about poor men is not, because they lack power, so it is perceived as adding to their problems from a place of superiority. This is a fundamentally good rule, as it allows society to criticize and challenge those with power while defending those without. Misandry is seen as more socially acceptable because it is an attack on power, specifically men. Ultimately, balance is needed so that neither occurs, but there is still a long way to go. Story 69. It is not held to the same standard as misogyny. As within woke theories of justice, equity has overtaken equality as a concept. In this political philosophy, discrimination against an individual from certain groups is more acceptable because members of that group are seen as privileged due to historic advantages. The idea is that men have more power and privilege. Therefore, misandry either is not real or is not as important. People who follow this philosophy do not even feel they are discriminating. Poor young men who have not had any historic privilege now get paid less than women, are less likely to own a home, and are less likely to have a degree, thus coping with this discrimination as well. This is one reason why equality for all as individuals is a much better justice theory. Story 70. Because misandry is mostly perpetrated by women, while misogyny is mostly perpetrated by men, and in our society we hold women to a far lower standard than men. Lonely, desperate men heavily contribute to the pedestals on which women are placed, as do single mothers, general societal standards, and the media. I think we are starting to see that shift now. The pendulum swings. Story 71. Misandry is mostly annoying, while misogyny more often leads to violence. The odds of me being harmed by misandry are much lower than by misogyny. Story 72. Since there seems to be a clear misalignment of reality among certain users of this platform, here is the original post. Story 73. Misandry is not good, but it is not a substantial threat on its own. Not until it is paired with a different form of bigotry that has real power behind it, such as racism, homophobia, or ableism. People who target minoritized men to express their man-related issues are the ones to watch out for. Story 74. It does not earn as many virtue signaling points. It typically will not unless the hatred of men is pretty extreme. Story 75. The misandry was in your first message. Yes, it is a thing. Yes, some women partake in it. But honestly, who cares? It is not affecting us for the most part. Leave them to it and hit the ignore button. Treating men differently and not holding the other side accountable for bigotry proves the point in your first message. Society claims equality, but only when it is convenient. True equality means equal accountability. Go say this to a woman's face. Yes, it is a thing. Yes, some men partake in it. But honestly, who cares? It is not affecting us for the most part. Leave them to it and hit the ignore button. Does misogyny only exist online too? Story 76. This video might bring some light. The system is what makes gender roles elevated to an unattainable standard. But as long as people follow its rules, both have to be in it to work. Women and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and others communities have been heard and demanded rights and opportunities to be their own individual citizens with rights equal to everyone else. Story 77. I think it is partially because many men have developed the ability to shrug off people talking nonsense. It does not matter whether it is women, politicians, or anyone else. Instead of giving them attention, I react with, "Bah! What an idiot," whispered to myself and continue with my day. Story 78. People who say that hatred of men does not cause harm believe that men are immune to weapons in general. Story 79. Women receive free passes that men would never get. I would be afraid if I were a decent man in this day and age. Story 80. Because men do not cry and complain as loudly as women. Most of us just shrug it off and continue with our day. Story 81. Because it receives more clicks and is the current featured issue, people have a fascination with separating issues and portraying themselves more as victims than others. Story 82. I think that since hatred of women is being eliminated, what we are seeing is the normalized hatred of men that has always existed even centuries ago. If you think it was hard to get rid of hatred of women, it is incredibly harder to remove hatred of men. The reason for that is because our society depends heavily on hatred of men. Story 83. Because feminism will not survive without blatant hatred of men. Hatred of men is the fuel. They need to keep hatred of men as a myth. They do not want men to realize that what they are doing to men, speaking negatively about men, is bigotry. Edit. Downvotes here are not surprising. Criticizing double standards often triggers defensiveness. But disagreement does not make a point invalid. If we cannot apply the same scrutiny to hatred of men that we apply to hatred of women, then the claim of equality is hollow. Story 84. For all those who feel that hatred of men is more justified than its ideological counterpart, or that it only exists online, please refer to the information shared by diligent members of this community. Story 85. 99% of the time misandry gets mentioned, it is in the context of sheer whataboutery. Yes, it is a thing. Yes, some women partake in it. But honestly, who cares? It is not affecting us for the most part. Leave them to it and hit the ignore button, especially in the context of this dating profile that triggered your trail of thought. Take out the misandrist, and there is still absolutely nothing about the bio that makes me think she might be worth a shot. I do not know what ethical non-monogamy means. Partnered but dating separately tells me even her partner does not see anything special enough in her. Star signs do not indicate personality. Cat mom. Probably stinks and house and clothes are covered in hair. Big beautiful woman. No, you are just fat. Misandrist. Insufferable and cannot take misogynistic banter. Dating unintentionally. Again, you are an insufferable person that nobody is prepared to claim. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.